You turned my life into a show. Now I'm turning yours into a yard sale.
The text message arrived while I was standing in the customs line at Vancouver International Airport, juggling my carry-on and the duty-free bag containing the expensive whiskey I'd bought for what I thought would be a celebration back home. That was fun. See you around, Eli. M-A-T-P-E-M. Imasti. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to process what I was reading. Cassandra Price, my wife of 8 years, had just sent me a laughing emoji after abandoning me at the airport, after telling me she was just running to the bathroom, and then vanishing with her entire crew of friends while I waited like an idiot for 2 hours. Sir, you need to move forward. The customs officer was looking at me with that special blend of annoyance and pity reserved for confused tourists. I shuffled forward, still clutching my phone. Another message popped up. This one from Janelle, Cass's best friend and professional enabler. OMG, Eli, you should have seen your face. We got it all on video. Hashtag prank gone wild. Hashtag airport abandonment. Gresham. My hands started shaking. Not from fear or sadness, but from pure, crystalline rage. They had planned this. They had coordinated it. They had filmed my confusion and humiliation for social media content. Passport, please. The officer's voice cut through my violent thoughts. I handed over my documents, trying to look normal while my marriage imploded via text message. The officer stamped my passport with mechanical efficiency, completely unaware that he was witnessing the exact moment Elliot Price decided to burn his old life to the ground. Welcome back to Canada, Mr. Price. Enjoy your stay. Aro. Oh, I will, I muttered, pocketing my phone. I absolutely will. Unemployment later, I was sitting in the airport's customer service area, explaining my situation to Sarah Chen, a 20-something employee with kind eyes and the patience of a saint. She'd been listening to my story with increasing disbelief, occasionally shaking her head. So let me get this straight, Sarah said, pulling up my reservation on her computer. Your wife and her friends flew here with you for a long weekend, then deliberately ditched you at the airport as a prank, and now you're stuck because your return ticket was canceled? Tightening. That's the size of it. I showed her the latest message from Cass. Don't be such a baby about it. It's just a joke. We'll pick you up tomorrow. Maybe. Sarah. Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. What kind of person does that to their spouse? Scrimmage. Shall. The kind who thinks marriage is content for her Instagram feed. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Can you help me get home? I'll pay whatever it costs. Relinquished via. Actually, I can do better than that. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. Your wife's group has been memorable. They live-streamed your reaction when you realized they'd left. It's been making the rounds among airport staff all day. Ship. My stomach dropped. They what? Posted it on Instagram stories. Janelle something or other has quite the following, apparently. The caption was, "Watch this man realize he's been pranked," with about 50 laughing emojis. Relieved, 10:11. The rage I'd been feeling crystallized into something colder and infinitely more dangerous. They hadn't just humiliated me, they'd broadcast it to thousands of strangers. They'd turned my pain into entertainment. Sarah, I said quietly, how tech-savvy are you? She grinned. Very. Why? Because I'm about to teach my wife and her friends a lesson about consequences. And I could use someone who understands social media. I get off work in 2 hours, she said, already reaching for her personal phone. And I have some ideas about how to make this interesting. By the time Sarah's shift ended, we'd laid the groundwork for what I was already thinking of as Operation Scorched Earth. She'd helped me access the hotel reservation system, using the confirmation numbers Cass had carelessly forwarded to me weeks ago. With a few keystrokes, I canceled every single booking the group had made for their extended Vancouver vacation. They're staying at the Fairmont? Sarah whistled low. That's $400 a night, minimum. Was staying, I corrected, watching the cancellation confirmations roll in. Now they're staying nowhere. But that was just the appetizer. The main course required me to get home, which Sarah had arranged through a friend who worked for the airline. I'd be on the last flight to Seattle, then driving the 3 hours back to our mid-sized Washington town while Cass and her crew discovered their accommodations had evaporated. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked as we walked toward my gate. "This is going to cause some serious drama." "They started it," I said simply. "I'm just finishing it." The flight home gave me 3 hours to be 3 hours. Reported to and shortened quickly for Longton deep texts. The flight home gave me 3 hours to a shines it. I had advantages Cass didn't know about. I was the primary name on most of our accounts. The house was in my name from before we married, and I had access to all the shared passwords she'd never bothered to change. More importantly, I understood something about my wife that she'd never grasped about me. Cass thought I was safe, predictable, the kind of guy who'd take a humiliating prank and just sulk about it for a few days before forgiving her with some pathetic attempt at dignity preservation. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I landed in Seattle at 11 p.m. and drove through the night, reaching our house just as dawn was breaking over the Cascade Mountains. The place looked exactly as I'd left it 4 days ago. Neat, welcoming, filled with 8 years of shared memories and accumulated stuff. By noon, it looked very different. I'd changed the locks first, then systematically removed every item that belonged to Cass or had been a gift from her family. Her clothes, her books, her collection of artisanal candles that cost more than most people's car payments. All of it went into boxes that I stacked neatly on the front porch with a sign. Free to good home. Missiles, thanks joint checking account was next. I transferred my half to my personal account, leaving exactly enough for Cass to buy a bus ticket home. The credit cards got canceled. The streaming services, gym membership, and various subscription boxes that Cass considered essential to her lifestyle. All canceled. But the masterstroke was accessing her laptop, which she'd left behind because she'd assumed they'd only be gone for the weekend. Cass kept everything on that computer. Her work files, her social media management tools, and most importantly, the group chat where she and her friends planned their little adventures. What I found there made my blood run cold. The airport abandonment hadn't been spontaneous. They'd been planning it for weeks, discussing how hilarious it would be to leave me stranded, debating whether to film it, laughing about how clueless I'd be. Worse, it wasn't even their idea. They'd seen something similar on TikTok and decided to recreate it with me as the unwitting star. Janelle had written, "Eli's so whipped, he'll probably just stand there waiting for hours. This is going to be content gold." Misled, Shells, had responded. "He's been so boring lately. Maybe this will remind him not to take me for granted." Imprisonment. Kerr, the tech entrepreneur who'd somehow inserted himself into my wife's friend group over the past 6 months, had added, "Dude's a construction worker. Probably doesn't even understand how the internet works. He'll never figure out we planned this." Wait, that last comment sealed Dylan's fate. I might manage construction projects for a living, but I'd grown up with computers and understood technology better than most people half my age. More importantly, I understood people, and I could see exactly what was happening here. Dylan wasn't just Cass's new friend. The timestamps on their private messages, the inside jokes, the way they coordinated their stories. They were having an affair, and the rest of the group was either oblivious or complicit. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Cass. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her increasingly frantic message. "Eli, what the heck? They canceled our hotel reservation, and they're saying you did it? And why can't I access our bank account? This isn't funny anymore. Call me back right now." I deleted the message and got back to work. By the time Cass and her crew made it back to town 2 days later, having spent one night sleeping in Dylan's rental car and another in the cheapest motel they could find, I'd transformed from the boring, predictable husband into something they hadn't expected, a problem. The first sign of trouble came when they tried to go to Cass's favorite brunch spot, only to discover that her credit cards had been declined. The second came when she tried to access our joint accounts from her phone and found them frozen. The third was when she came home to find the locks changed and her belongings stacked on the porch like a sidewalk sale. I watched from the living room window as she stood on the front lawn, screaming at her phone. Janelle and Dylan flanked her like confused bodyguards, clearly out of their depth in a situation that couldn't be solved with hashtags and influencer connections. When Cass started pounding on the door, I opened it just wide enough to speak through the chain. Can I help you? I asked politely. What the heck is wrong with you? She shrieked. Let me in. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. I held up the deed, which I'd retrieved from our filing cabinet. House is in my name. Bought it 3 years before we met, remember? You're welcome to take your things, though. I left them outside for you. You can't just kick me out. I'll call the police. Go ahead, I shrugged. Tell them your husband changed the locks on his own house after you abandoned him in a foreign country as a prank. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. Dylan stepped forward, puffing out his chest like he was about to intimidate me. Look, man, this has gone far enough. Cass made a mistake, but you're being crazy about it. I looked at him through the gap in the door, taking in his expensive haircut, his designer clothes, his soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a smartphone. Dylan, right? The tech entrepreneur? I smiled. Funny thing about technology, it keeps records of everything, including text messages about affairs. The color drained from his face. Behind him, Cass went very still. I don't know what you're talking about, Dylan said, but his voice cracked slightly. Sure you don't. I pulled out my phone and started reading from their private message thread. Can't wait to get rid of the dead weight so we can finally be together. That was you, Dylan, from last Tuesday. Want me to keep going? Jell's mouth fell open. She turned to stare at Cass and Dylan, the pieces finally clicking together. You two are... Oh my God, Cass. You said you were just friends. It's not what it looks like, Cass said quickly, but the damage was done. Her carefully constructed friend group was imploding in real time. Actually, it's exactly what it looks like, I said. But here's the thing. I don't care anymore. You want to be with Dylan? Congratulations. You want to humiliate me for social media content? Mission accomplished. But you don't get to do it from my house, using my money, while pretending to be the victim. I closed the door and walked away, leaving them to argue among themselves on my front lawn. Through the window, I watched Janelle storm off, her phone already out to spread the news to their extended social circle. Dylan and Cass were left standing among the boxes of her belongings, looking like exactly what they were. Two people who'd gotten in over their heads. But I wasn't done with them. Not even close. That evening, I called my old friend Mike Patterson, who'd gone to law school instead of following me into construction. Mike had always been the smartest guy in our high school class, and he'd built a successful practice handling divorces and civil litigation. Eli? Jesus, I heard about what happened at the airport. Cass really did that? She did. And now I need to make sure she can't do it again. In prison. What do you mean? I mean I want a divorce, Mike. And I want to make sure she doesn't get to rewrite history and play the victim. Can you help me with that? Absolutely. Especially if you've got documentation of the affair and the public humiliation. Washington's a no-fault state, but judges still don't like it when people act like a-holes. I've got documentation. Lots of it. Good. Bring everything to my office tomorrow. We'll file papers by the end of the week. Unwilling, I hung up. I poured myself 3 fingers of the whiskey I'd bought in Vancouver. The bottle that was supposed to celebrate our anniversary, but would instead toast the end of our marriage. It tasted like victory and regret in equal measure. My phone buzzed with another message from Cass. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Rinse, I typed back. You're right. See you in court. Then I blocked her number and went to bed in my own house, in my own bed, for the first time in years feeling like I could breathe. The next morning brought a surprise I should have seen coming. Sarah Chen was standing on my front porch with 2 cups of coffee and a laptop bag, looking like she'd driven all night from Vancouver. You look terrible, she said by way of greeting. Thanks. You look like you should be at work in another country. I took some vacation time. Figured you might need backup for whatever comes next. She handed me one of the coffees. Plus, I've been thinking about your wife's little friend group, and I have some ideas. I let her in, grateful for the company, and the continuers especially I tried to work. I let her in according for the company and the caffeine. Sarah had an energy about her that reminded me why I'd been drawn to her help in the first place. She was smart, direct, and had zero tolerance for BS. "Show me what you found on the laptop," she said, settling onto my couch like she belonged there. I pulled up the group chat and let her read through the messages. Her expression grew darker with each screenshot. "These people are sociopaths," she said finally. "Look at this. They planned the whole thing like a military operation. Who does that? People who think other people exist for their entertainment. Well, they're about to learn different." Sarah opened her laptop and cracked her knuckles. "I've been doing some research on your wife's friends. Want to see what I found?" For the next hour, Sarah walked me through what she'd discovered about Cass's social circle. Janelle's influencer career was built on borrowed money and fake engagement. Dylan's tech startup was hemorrhaging investor cash and facing a workplace harassment lawsuit from a former employee. The other members of their group were equally fragile, their polished social media personas hiding debt, failed relationships, and various minor scandals. "They're all one bad week away from their lives falling apart," Sarah explained. "That's probably why they're so desperate for content and drama. They need the distraction from their own problems. So what do we do with that information?" Sarah grinned. "We give them the drama they want, but not the kind they're expecting." Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to hide from the public humiliation Cass had orchestrated, we'd lean into it. Sarah would help me create my own social media presence, telling my side of the story with receipts and documentation. We'd expose the affair, the premeditated nature of the airport prank, and the toxic dynamics of their entire friend group. "The internet loves a good revenge story," Sarah explained, "especially when the victim fights back smart instead of just getting mad. I'm not sure I want to be internet famous. You won't be, but they will be, and not in the way they want." We spent the rest of the day setting up accounts and preparing content. Sarah was a wizard with social media, understanding the algorithms and psychology in ways that made me feel ancient, despite being only 15 years older than her. By evening, we'd created a Twitter thread, an Instagram account, and a TikTok video that laid out the entire story with military precision. The airport footage that Janelle had posted became evidence of premeditation. The text messages became proof of the affair. The financial manipulation became documentation of my measured response to betrayal. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her finger hovering over the post button. "Do it." Dismantle was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, we had hundreds of shares and comments. By midnight, the story had spread to Reddit, Facebook, and various gossip blogs. The consensus was clear. Cass and Dylan were garbage humans who'd gotten exactly what they deserved. But the real fireworks started the next morning, when Janelle woke up to find her mentions flooded with people calling her an enabler and demanding that brands drop their sponsorship deals with her. By noon, she'd lost 3 major partnerships and was posting teary-eyed apology videos that only made things worse. Dylan's startup faced a different kind of reckoning when his investors started asking questions about his judgment and character. It's hard to pitch yourself as a trustworthy business partner when the internet is full of screenshots showing you helping to orchestrate cruel pranks on innocent people. But Cass got the worst of it. Her PR firm, which specialized in reputation management for local businesses, couldn't afford to keep an employee who'd become synonymous with toxic behavior. She was fired via email, with her former boss noting that her personal brand conflicts with our company values. I watched it all unfold from my living room, Sarah beside me providing commentary and managing our responses to the flood of support messages. It felt surreal to see my private humiliation transformed into public vindication. "You feel guilty," Sarah observed, watching my face. "A little. This is destroying their lives." "They destroyed their own lives. You just documented it." She closed her laptop and turned to face me. "Besides, they're not done fighting back. This is just round 1. She was right. That afternoon, Cass showed up at my house with Dylan and a guy I didn't recognize. Tall, muscular, with the kind of swagger that suggested he was used to intimidating people. "That's Victor," Sarah said, peering through the window. "Dylan's friend. I saw him in some of the social media posts from their Vancouver trip." "Great. They brought muscle. You want me to call the police?" "Not yet. Let's see what they want." I opened the door but didn't step outside. Cass looked like she hadn't slept in days. her usually perfect appearance disheveled and desperate. "Take it down," she said without preamble. "Take down all the posts, delete the accounts, and we'll call it even." "Even?" I laughed. "You think we're even?" "You've humiliated us enough," Dylan said. "Janelle lost her sponsorships. I'm having problems with my investors, and Cass lost her job. Isn't that enough revenge for you?" "Let me think about that." I pretended to consider it. "No." Victor stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Maybe you need some help making the right decision. Maybe you need to get off my property before I call the police and report you for trespassing and making threats." "You think you're so smart," Cass spat, "but you're just a construction worker with a high school education. We can destroy you just as easily as you destroyed us. You're welcome to try, but you might want to consider that I'm not the same guy you abandoned at the airport. That guy was trying to save his marriage. This guy is trying to end it as painfully as possible." I closed the door and watched through the window as they argued among themselves. Victor wanted to escalate, but Dylan and Cass were smart enough to realize that anything they did now would just make their situation worse. They left, but I knew they'd be back. People like them always escalated when they felt cornered. The question was what they'd try next, and whether I'd be ready for it. "This isn't over," Sarah said, echoing my thoughts. "No, but we're winning. Far. What's the next move?" We smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Mike that morning. "We make it official. Tomorrow, Cass gets served with divorce papers. And then we really get to have some fun. We're served at 9 a.m. on a Thursday, delivered to the cheap motel where Cass had been staying since I'd locked her out of the house." According to Mike, the process server said she'd gone completely ballistic, screaming about how I couldn't just end our marriage without giving her a chance to fix things. "She seems to think this is all still salvageable," Mike told me over lunch. "Her lawyer called this morning wanting to discuss reconciliation." "What did you tell him?" "That my client is seeking dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences, adultery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and that we have documentation for all of it." Simmons, how's that likely to play out? Grinned. "Washington's a no-fault state, so the adultery doesn't matter for the divorce itself. But it matters a lot for spousal support and property division, especially when combined with her abandoning you in Canada and the public humiliation campaign. Judges don't like people who act in bad faith." Meaning? Admiration? Meaning, she's probably going to walk away with whatever she brought into the marriage, and not much else. The house is yours, the retirement accounts are mostly yours, and she's got no claim to spousal support given the circumstances. Strapped than I'd hoped for. But I knew Cass wouldn't go quietly. She'd built her entire identity around being the victim of other people's bad behavior, and accepting responsibility for the destruction of our marriage would require a level of self-awareness she'd never demonstrated. I was right. That evening, she launched her counterattack. Sarah and I were at my house working on a response to a journalist who wanted to write about our story, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Someone had created a fake social media account in my name and was posting increasingly unhinged rants about women, marriage, and revenge. "This is pretty sophisticated," Sarah said, scrolling through the fake posts. "They're using photos from your real accounts and mimicking your writing style. If you didn't know better, you'd think you'd actually posted this stuff." Fake posts painted me as an obsessive, controlling husband who'd snapped when his wife tried to leave him. They included fabricated screenshots of text messages where I supposedly threatened Cass and her friends, along with doctored photos that made me look unstable and dangerous. "Dylan's handiwork," I said, recognizing the technical sophistication. "He's trying to flip the narrative and make me look like the crazy one. It's working, too. Look at the comments. Pesticide. Who'd been supporting me just hours earlier were now questioning whether they'd gotten the full story. The fake posts were being shared widely, with commenters expressing concern for Cass's safety and criticizing the mob mentality that had destroyed her life based on one side of the story. "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "We prove they're fake, and then we end this once and for all." The next morning, I called in a favor for my old friend Jake Morrison, who worked in cybersecurity for a major tech company. Jake owed me for helping him through a messy divorce 3 years earlier, and he was happy to return the favor by analyzing the fake social media accounts. Whoever did this was good, but not great, Jake explained over the phone. They used a VPN to hide their location, but they made some basic mistakes with the metadata on the photos and the IP addresses on the account creation. Give me a few hours and I'll have everything you need to prove these are fake. While Jake worked his magic, Sarah and I prepared for what I was starting to think of as the nuclear option. If Cass and Dylan wanted to play dirty, I was ready to show them exactly how dirty things could get. I'd been holding back one piece of information that I'd discovered in Cass's laptop. Evidence that Dylan's startup was essentially a Ponzi scheme, using new investor money to pay fake returns to earlier investors, while Dylan and his partners siphoned off cash for personal expenses. It was the kind of fraud that could result in federal charges, and I had emails and financial documents that proved it. "You sure you want to use this?" Sarah asked, looking at the evidence I'd compiled. "This could send him to prison." "Miss, he tried to destroy my reputation and my life. He's been stealing money from investors while sleeping with my wife. I think prison's exactly where he belongs." By afternoon, Jake had provided the technical evidence proving the social media accounts were fake, complete with digital fingerprints that trace back to Dylan's computer. Sarah helped me package everything into a comprehensive response that not only cleared my name, but exposed the lengths to which my enemies had gone to discredit me. But I didn't stop there. I also sent the evidence of Dylan's financial crimes to the FBI's white-collar crime division, the state attorney general's office, and a financial journalist who specialized in startup fraud. The response was swift and devastating. Within hours, Dylan's fake social media campaign had backfired spectacularly, with people expressing outrage that he'd tried to manipulate them with fabricated evidence. The revelation that he was also apparently running a fraudulent business scheme turned him from a sympathetic figure into a pariah. By the end of the week, Dylan was facing federal investigation. His investors were demanding answers, and his business was collapsing. Cass, meanwhile, had been dropped by her lawyer after it became clear that she'd been complicit in the fake social media campaign. "It's over," Sarah said, watching the latest news coverage of Dylan's legal troubles. "They can't come back from this. Not one more thing I need to do." That weekend, I drove to the country club where Cass and her friends used to hold their weekly brunches, the place where they'd planned their various schemes and laughed about their victims. It was also where Cass's family had their membership, and where her parents were likely to be having their usual Sunday meal. I found them at their regular table on the terrace, looking uncomfortable as other diners whispered and stared. The story had become local news, and everyone knew who they were. "Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton," I said, approaching their table. "I hope you don't mind if I join you for a moment." Cass' father, a retired banker who'd never liked me much, gestured to an empty chair. "Eli, I suppose we should talk." "I suppose we should." I sat down and looked at them both. Two people who'd raised a daughter who thought other people existed for her entertainment. "I wanted you to hear this from me directly. I'm divorcing your daughter, and I'm going to make sure she doesn't get a penny more than she's legally entitled to." "Now see here," Mr. Hamilton started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I also wanted to thank you." They looked confused. "Thank you for raising a woman who thought it would be funny to abandon her husband in a foreign country as a prank. Thank you for teaching her that other people's pain is content for her social media accounts. And thank you for showing me exactly what kind of family I've been trying to fit into for the past 8 years." Mr. Hamilton's eyes filled with tears. "Eli, please. Cassandra made a mistake, but she's still our daughter. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive." "No," I said simply. "I can't, and I won't. Your daughter destroyed our marriage for a few minutes of viral video content. She chose her image over our relationship, and now she gets to live with the consequences." I stood up, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. "Give Cass my regards," I said, "and tell her that the next time she wants to prank someone, she should pick a target who won't fight back." Epilogue: The Resolution. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Cass had eventually found a new lawyer, but the outcome was exactly what Mike had predicted. She got nothing beyond her personal belongings and a small portion of the assets she'd brought into the marriage. The house, the retirement accounts, and everything else stayed with me. Dylan was facing federal fraud charges, and had fled to a country without an extradition treaty, leaving his investors and his legal problems behind. Janelle had tried to rebuild her influencer career, but found that brands were reluctant to work with someone associated with such a public scandal. Cass herself had moved back in with her parents and was working at a retail job. Her PR career effectively over. According to mutual friends, she'd spent months trying to convince people that she was the real victim. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and the public sentiment too firmly against her. Sarah had moved to town and taken a job with a local marketing firm, bringing her social media expertise to help small businesses grow their online presence. We'd been dating for 3 months, taking things slow and building something real, instead of rushing into anything. "Any regrets?" she asked one evening as we sat on my back deck, watching the sunset over the mountains. "About the divorce? No. About how I handled it?" I considered the question. Maybe. I could have just walked away quietly, filed for divorce, and moved on with my life. But then they would have gotten away with it. They would have kept treating people like entertainment and never faced any consequences. True. And I wouldn't have met you. She smiled and leaned against my shoulder. So it worked out. It did. Though I have to admit, I never expected my marriage to end with my wife becoming an internet cautionary tale about the dangers of toxic social media behavior. Life's funny that way. You think you know how your story's going to end, and then someone abandons you at an airport, and everything changes. I thought about that as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A year ago, I'd been married to a woman who saw me as a prop in her social media performance. Now, I was free, financially secure, and building something real, with someone who actually valued me as a person. Cass had been right about one thing. The airport prank had changed everything, just not in the way she'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if it was Cass trying to reach out from a new phone. But the message was from someone else entirely. "Mr. Price, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates. We represent several of Dylan Kerr's former investors who are interested in pursuing civil litigation. Would you be available to discuss your role in exposing Mr. Kerr's fraudulent activities?" Showed the message to Sarah, who read it and whistled low. "They want you to testify against Dylan?" Looks like it. Apparently the evidence I provided to the FBI is going to be crucial in their case. "You going to do it?" "I don't know." Oh, Dylan's smug face when he'd tried to intimidate me on my own front porch. About his role in the fake social media campaign. About all the investors he'd stolen from while living his lavish lifestyle. "Yeah," I said, typing back a response. "I think I am. Because sometimes, when people try to destroy your life for their own entertainment, the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's making sure they face every single consequence of their choices, no matter how long it takes. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you come out the other side stronger than you were before." 6 months after that, I was sitting in a federal courthouse in Seattle, watching Dylan Kerr get sentenced to 8 years in prison for securities fraud. He'd been extradited back to the United States after his money ran out, and his safe haven country decided he wasn't worth the diplomatic trouble. Cass was in the gallery, looking older and sadder than I remembered. Our eyes met briefly as I left the courtroom, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret, or maybe just self-pity. With Cass, it was always hard to tell. I didn't stop to find out. I had a life to get back to, and she was no longer part of it. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was waiting with coffee and a smile. "How did it go?" 8 years. He'll be out in 5 with good behavior. But his business career is over. Good. What about Cass? What about her? She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. Walk her to the car in comfortable silence, leaving the courthouse and everything it represented behind us. The whole ordeal had taken 2 years from start to finish, but it was finally, completely over. As we drove home through the mountains, I thought about the man I'd been when this all started. Married to someone who didn't respect me, tolerating behavior I should have confronted, living a life that was more performance than reality. That man was gone, destroyed as thoroughly as my marriage had been. In his place was someone harder, but also more honest. Someone who understood that respect isn't given freely, but earned and maintained through boundaries and consequences. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Just thinking about how different things are now. Different or worse different? Definitely better, though I could have done without the federal courthouse testimony." She laughed. "Think of it as your civic duty. You helped put a criminal behind bars and got justice for his victims." "I suppose, though I still can't believe it all started with a prank at an airport." The best revenge stories always start with something small. Someone thinks they can push you around, and they end up learning exactly how wrong they were. Squeezed her hand back, thinking about the house we were driving toward, the life we were building together, the future that stretched out ahead of us like an open road. Cass had been right about one thing. Abandoning me at that airport had changed everything. She'd just been wrong about who would benefit from the change.